Depending on who's doing the talking, those who have given away intelligence about the military and security infrastructure of the United States have been called spies, heroes, and traitors. But looking at the context around such leaks can help us understand why the leakers did what they did. Today, we're going to take a look at the history of U.S. intelligence leaks. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other espionage-related topics you would like to hear about. Okay, time to tighten up those faucets. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg said their vows in 1939. Their vows to support the Communist Party, that is. Soon after they said them, the couple got married. The wedding may have been nice, but the whole aligning themselves with communism thing got Julius discharged from the U.S. Army Signal Corps in 1945. Alexander Feklisov, a former handler with the KGB, stated Julius was approached by the Soviet Union to be a spy in 1942 and later recruited others to the cause, including his brother-in-law, David Greenglass. By 1950, both Julius and Ethel were said to have been cooperating with the Soviet Union. They were arrested that year and put on trial in 1951. They were both convicted of conspiracy to commit espionage and sentenced to death. Turns out the government takes that kind of thing pretty seriously. The information the Rosenbergs were said to have provided the Soviet Union is not entirely clear. Greenglass, who was also caught, claimed he provided Julius with instructions on how to make an atomic bomb. Which, how? Did somebody leave the instructions on the copier? The case against Ethel was weak, and neither Julius nor Ethel ever admitted wrongdoing. In fact, they turned down a plea deal that would have reduced their sentence to life in prison in exchange for a confession, saying, "We will not be coerced, even under pain of death, to bear false witness." The relatively scant evidence against Ethel makes any potential motive for her unclear. And because her brother later admitted he'd lied when he said Ethel was complicit in the crimes, it's possible Ethel was innocent. As for Julius's motivation, another spy convicted alongside the Rosenbergs claimed he did it due to loyalty to the Soviet Union. Historically, this has not been the best reason to do things. Guilty or innocent, the Rosenbergs were sent to the electric chair on June 19, 1953. In 1967, Rand Corporation analyst Daniel Ellsberg started working on a report about U.S. decision-making in Vietnam. Initiated by Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, the assessment was meant to look at every aspect of U.S. involvement in Vietnam between 1945 and 1967, and to provide Sylvester Stallone with accurate research for his Rambo 2 screenplay. It took nearly 2 years to complete, and ultimately constituted what Ellsberg, who had spent 2 years working in Vietnam as a government employee, would later call evidence of a quarter-century of aggression, broken treaties, deceptions, stolen elections, lies, and murder. It was not a flattering report, but at least McNamara could count on Ellsberg, a former Marine who had worked under Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, to keep the whole thing a secret. Right? Well, not exactly. In March of 1971, Ellsberg's frustration with the government's activities in Vietnam, fueled by his own experience there, prompted him to contact Neil Sheehan, a reporter with the New York Times. On June 13, 1971, Sheehan published what became known as the Pentagon Papers. As you may have noticed, this is the opposite of keeping a secret. Initially, there was little response from the public or the federal government, but President Richard Nixon was urged by Security Advisor Henry Kissinger to respond. That was bad advice. The New York Times was issued an injunction to halt publication, which drew more attention to the leak. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that publication could continue, but by then, other news media outlets had picked up the story. Among the revelations in the Pentagon Papers were details about U.S. involvement in the overthrow of the South Vietnamese president in 1963, a plan to provoke military action to justify U.S. response, and the goal of the U.S. to protect its reputation. It would be like finding a notebook titled, "My List of Crimes and How I Committed Them" in Al Capone's vault. Instead of the nothing that they found. The Nixon administration did not change its approach to the war in the wake of the Pentagon Papers, and Ellsberg could not escape the consequences of his own actions. He was charged with violating the Espionage Act of 1917, conspiracy, and theft. However, the charges against him were dismissed after wiretapping and other improper government conduct came to light. Ellsberg has said his one regret about releasing the information was that he wished he had released it earlier. Robert Hansen joined the FBI in 1976, perhaps to get a head start on all those mbop jokes he would endure in the 90s. He eventually entered counterintelligence, and by 1979, he was providing information to the Soviet Union. Hey, gotta respect a quick starter. Hansen's acts of espionage took place in phases. His initial activity spanned the years 1979 to 1981, and mostly involved low-level information from the New York FBI office. He provided data to Russia's main intelligence directorate, or GRU, until 1981 for a total of over $21,000, but stopped after his wife discovered what he was doing. Wait, GRU? The Minions guy? He really is despicable. Hansen initiated another round of espionage in 1985, this time in cooperation with the KGB. During this phase of his spying, he gave the Soviets the most sensitive kinds of data, including information about war strategies, details about weapons, and the identities of U.S. operatives. But the collapse of the Soviet Union prompted Hansen to put a stop to the whole thing. Their checks were probably bouncing at that point. Hansen's third and final phase of activities started in 1999 and continued until he was apprehended. During the early 1990s, the U.S. government was aware that a mole existed in the ranks of an intelligence agency and believed it was a member of the CIA. Hansen caught wind of this and thought he was safe to carry on, especially after CIA agent Aldrich Ames was arrested in 1994. It wasn't until 2000 that Hansen was outed as an FBI mole by a former KGB officer. Man, if you can't trust the KGB, who can you trust? The Bureau launched an investigation into Hansen, and he was arrested in 2001. So why did he do it? For fat stacks of cash. Hansen took home nearly $1.5 million in money, diamonds, and gifts as payment for his spying. Additionally, Hansen was motivated by excitement and stimulation. According to his friend Paul Moore, Hansen also wanted to play the spy game better than anybody's ever played it before. And while he's no James Bond, he did go years of escaping detection. After Hansen was apprehended, he was tried for espionage, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison. No word on whether he had to give all those gifts back to the KGB. Hansen passed away behind bars on June 5, 2023. Chelsea Manning grew up in Oklahoma and Wales, but not at the same time. She moved to the latter with her mother after her parents divorced. Her father was a naval intelligence analyst who later worked on information technology in the private sector. Manning enlisted in the U.S. Army in 2007, at that time with the name Bradley Edward Manning, and was sent to Iraq in 2009, where she was tasked with something called predictive analysis. While in this role, she concluded that the approaches of counterinsurgency warfare were extremely self-destructive. This stuck with Manning, and in 2010, she gave her information to WikiLeaks. The initial material that Manning provided went live on February 18, 2010. Subsequent posts included videos, war logs, and diplomatic cables alongside Guantanamo Bay files. Videos from Iraq featured a military airstrike that took the lives of civilians, while the war logs detailed violent acts undertaken by Native and Western Coalition personnel, listed the names of civilian casualties, and assessments of how accounts of activities had been misrepresented to the public. Manning's information included roughly 750,000 documents. This made Manning the whistleblower who committed the biggest breach of classified data in U.S. history. Despite contacting several newspapers and media outlets, Manning opted for WikiLeaks to maintain anonymity. But for some reason, Manning told a hacker named Adrian Lamo that she was behind the leaks. After Lamo was leaked by WikiLeaks as being a contributor, Lamo went to the authorities and reported Manning, which just goes to prove the old saying, if you've committed the biggest breach of classified data in U.S. history, don't tell anybody. Manning was arrested in late May 2010. She pleaded guilty to 10 offenses in February of 2013, and in June of the same year was found guilty of multiple offenses such as computer fraud and theft. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison, but her sentence was commuted by President Obama in January of 2017, after Manning had served only 7 years. Edward Snowden took his first job with the government in 2006, the same year that the Miami Vice movie came out. So big things were happening. The gig was a position at the CIA where Snowden worked in networking and engineering, while assigned to the agency's headquarters in Langley, Virginia. While there, he observed how out of date the CIA's technology was, a weakness he would later exploit. Snowden eventually interacted with CIA agents abroad who were disillusioned with their roles under the Bush administration. He considered blowing the whistle then, but with the upcoming presidential election, decided to wait and see what the Obama administration would bring. Maybe he'd buy the CIA new stuff. Ultimately disappointed by Obama, Snowden went to work as a contractor for the NSA and in 2012 was sent to Hawaii, where what he considered the ineptitude of the NSA reached its apex. Snowden became aware of software that would respond to malware without human intervention. For him, this seemed far too open and available for anyone to exploit, so he began downloading information, saving it on thumb drives, and departed Hawaii for Hong Kong in May of 2013. Snowden initially released a batch of information to The Guardian in June 2013. Over the subsequent months, additional media outlets picked up the documents and started reporting on Snowden and his disclosures. The information Snowden released detailed surveillance programs conducted by the NSA, the CIA, and the government communications headquarters in the United Kingdom. Snowden also revealed details about the NSA and its clandestine operations, the names of specific websites that government agencies had targeted, and even a fake Facebook server set up by the NSA. That seems like a lot. Apparently, he was right about things not being secure. Snowden's identity was never in question. Days after his disclosures went public, he revealed himself as the source, which either demonstrates incredible confidence or the naivete of a man who watched too many Aaron Sorkin dramas. He was still in Hong Kong at the time, but fled to Moscow. Facing charges of theft of government property and violation of the Espionage Act of 1917, Snowden's relocation to Russia allowed him to escape extradition, and he's been there ever since. In 2022, Snowden acquired Russian citizenship, in which he took an oath of allegiance to the Russian Federation. Maybe he's gearing up to blow the whistle on the KGB, but I'm not sure where you run to hide after that, Eddie. They'll be pissed. They're gonna want to have a meeting. So what do you think? Were any of these breaches justified, or were they all just a bunch of spies? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.